Thank you, Dana. Good afternoon, everybody. When Dana first asked me if I would do this webinar on sensory processing, I said, well, how long do we have? And she said, well, you have about 15 minutes. And I thought, goodness, it's such a complex topic. What on earth could we cover in 15 minutes that would actually be of benefit to you? So I thought about it, and I knew we'd have a lot of early interventionists who go out into the home, and I think sometimes it's very frustrating because the parent is aware that something's not quite going on right with their child. So they may be doing a lot of internet searching, and they go on a website and they look up sensory processing and they see the red flags. And then they go on a website and they look up attention deficit disorder and they see the red flags. Or they might look up challenge in behavior or autism spectrum disorder. And basically the red flags are all pretty similar. So I thought about that and how just incredibly difficult that must be for a family and for our early interventionists who are trying to help families kind of figure this out. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go back to the very basics of sensory processing, and we're going to talk about what it is and what has to be present in order for us to even assume that the things we're seeing have a sensory basis. Then we're going to go through some strategies that you will be able to use with the children that you work with, and then we'll talk about at the end when you need to call in somebody else to give you some help. So let's get started. So what is sensory processing? Let's suppose I walk into my kitchen and I am greeted by the smell of something baking in my oven. The smell goes through receptors in my nose up to my brain, and based on my previous experiences, my brain tells me that someone is baking chocolate chip cookies. I don't have to actually see the cookies or taste the cookies to know what they are, because I have previously experienced the sensations of seeing, touching, tasting, and smelling chocolate chip cookies. I am able to interpret the smell by smell alone. So I smell those cookies and I might saunter over to my kitchen and pour myself a glass of milk and settle in for a nice warm snack. Now, if you were an early interventionist in my home and you were observing my response to this sensory input, you would say, I think you would agree, that the response I had to that sensory input, that smelling of those chocolate chip cookies by pouring myself a glass of milk, was an appropriate response. But let's change the scenario a little bit. Now I walk into my kitchen. This is probably more likely to happen, and I see smoke pouring out of my oven. I smell this kind of burned, acrid smell. Maybe the smoke detector's going off. If I slowly sauntered over to the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of milk and sat down in my comfortable chair to anticipate my chocolate chip cookies, you would probably say that I misinterpreted that sensory input and that the response I made was not appropriate. That is all sensory processing is. It's our ability to take information in through our sensory system. It goes up to our brain interprets it, and then we respond to it. This ability begins in utero, and it develops throughout the lifespan, and it's something that most of us are not even aware of because it's just an automatic process for us. So there's some key concepts when we look at sensory processing theory. One is that learning, and when I talk about learning, I'm talking about cognitive learning and motor learning, occurs when a child experiences sensation, and then the brain interprets it and uses that information to make a response. Second concept is that if there is a problem in either processing the sensation or interpreting it, then learning will be affected. But the good news is that with treatment, our central nervous system, there's a lot of plasticity, and we can improve in our ability to process and interpret sensory input. So to further kind of understand that, let's take a look at two babies. Mom and Dad are playing with their twin babies on the floor, Abby and Sam. Dad picks up a bell, and he rings it. Abby's eyes get wide, and she turns to the sound of the bell. She gets quiet, and she smiles. For Abby, this is a very pleasant experience. Sam, however, hears the same ringing bell, but it is very unpleasant for him. He closes his eyes, he turns away from the sound, and he begins to cry. So the level of the sound of the bell was the same, but each baby interpreted it very, very differently. How we process sensation varies from individual to individual. So I often hear people say, well, they have sensory problems. It's a sensory issue. Well, we're only concerned about sensory issues when they're out there on the ends of the continuum and they interfere with our ability to do the things that we need to do, to participate in our life activities. If we have good sensory processing abilities, these are the things on your slide that we're able to do. We can play, we can go to work, we can complete our school activities, we can maintain attention and focus to the things that we want to do, and we are able to manage our emotional state. Now, a lot of times people will ask what causes a sensory processing disorder, and we don't really know exactly what causes it. There appears to be a genetic connection, and you will often see that siblings will all have various degrees of sensory problems. But oftentimes, if I'm talking with a parent, I'll find out that maybe the parent had some of these sensory issues when they were a child, and maybe even still as an adult. But again, they were more subtle, and they were able to continue and do all the things that they wanted to do. But now maybe they see that their child has the same kinds of things, but they're further out on that continuum. There's some thought that the causes can include pre- and postnatal environment. It's estimated that 12 to 30% of the population has some type of sensory processing disorder, and that boys are 3 times more likely than girls to be diagnosed. Again, as we see with other similar kinds of things, boys sometimes are diagnosed more frequently because when a boy tends to not be able to participate in the things he should be able to do, he tends to act out a little bit more with disruptive behavior. So, let's talk about our senses. I want you to think back to kindergarten, and that was a long time ago for some of us, but in kindergarten we learned there were 5 senses, and they were taste, smell, sight, hearing, and touch. So today I'm here to tell you that there are 2 additional sensory systems. So I want you on your public chat to just take a minute, and if you know what these are, go ahead and type them in, or if you want to guess what they are, just take a minute and type in what the other 2 sensory systems are. Okay, great. I think we can probably stop the seminar now because you guys already know this information. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into it. The 2 additional senses are our vestibular sense and our proprioceptive sense. Some of you use the word kinesthetic sense. That is the same as our proprioceptive sense. So so you're on the right track. Each one of these sensory systems has a receptor that takes information to the brain to interpret. So the eyes are the receptors for vision, our nose is our receptor for smell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all of our sensory systems are important. All 7 of them are. But there are 3 that are extremely important, and they are vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile. When you're working with a child and you think the child has a sensory problem, unless you can go back and find red flags in one of these 3 areas, then you cannot make the assumption that the behavior that you're seeing has a sensory base. So this is critical that you see red flags in vestibular, proprioceptive, or tactile. So we're going to take these 3 and we're going to kind of look at them much more carefully and look at what they might look like. Let's start with touch. As I said, all sensory systems have receptors, and so our receptors for touch are located throughout our skin. And touch is the first system to function in utero. It is our most mature system at birth. A fetus responds to touch stimuli as early as 8 to 10 weeks post-conception. It develops in our hands and our mouth first. By the time a baby is born, a full-term baby is born, that baby is going to respond to touch by moving towards it with an approach response. Now, if you think about that, that is so important because when you take that little baby home from the hospital and you're a first-time mom and you snuggle up with that little baby and that baby snuggles back, tucks in, puts his little head up on yours, that's what really pushes the bonding. And so this ability to respond to touch in a positive manner is huge for our emotional development and our attachment to our caregivers. And one of the things we see in our preterm babies is more of an avoidance of touch. And if you've worked with, work with a young mom and she thinks her baby doesn't like her because the baby's arching away from her and not wanting to be with her. Touch is the largest sensory system that we have, and we further divide touch into 2 very separate and distinct areas. So the first area we're going to talk about is discriminative touch. Now, discriminative touch is how I tell about the properties of something. Is something sharp or dull? If I have good discriminative touch, I am able to ride down the highway, pull into the toll booth, dig into my pocketbook, and pick out the quarter for the toll versus the nickel without ever taking my eyes off the road or the toll booth. That's discriminative touch. If I don't have good discriminative touch, I think of it as kind of being wrapped up in plastic or having rubber gloves on. So even though I am getting some tactile information, I'm not getting the same tactile information that perhaps my peers are. So I want you to think about discriminative touch and think about if you're in the home and you're observing a child, what you might see that would be a red flag that this child's discriminative touch system is not working as well as it should. So this child is under-responsive to tactile input. So take a minute and think about that and put on your public chat what kinds of things you might see. Okay, great. We've got from Fairfax Falls Church, they say increased mouthing of toys beyond what you would expect. That's certainly something that we see. So this child is putting things in his mouth beyond the time that we see infants do this. Because why are they doing that? Because the mouth is rich in tactile receptors. So when they put it in their mouth, they're getting more information than if they're putting it in their hands. Kristen mentions rough play with toys and hitting and banging. Again, they're not getting that information that they need from the toys that they're picking up. So that's right, they're going to be a little bit less skilled with working with their hands. Poor hand used to manipulate toys, another one. Touch hungry is a term that I use because I find these children will tend to have their hands on everything. So if they come in and you've got your toys out there, they're touching everything, or they're walking down the hall and they've got their hands on the walls because they're trying to get that sensory information that they're not getting automatically. Someone mentioned bumping into things. These children do tend to have a high pain tolerance. So they might run into something or fall down and you kind of hold your breath because you think they're going to jump up and just be crying and screaming, but in fact, they just hardly even notice. They don't notice that their shoes ate their socks. You know, if you ever walk around, you know how your socks get kind of scrunched down under the arch of your foot? And it's very, very irritating. But these children don't notice things like that, or they don't notice that they have food on their mouth. These children are hyper-vigilant visually, and that's because they're having to use their sense of vision to compensate for what their tactile sense isn't giving them. So if I had to look into my purse and dig around and find that quarter and that nickel, then I'm going to put myself in a safety issue because I'm not looking at the road. And when you have to use your eyes to give you information that your body should just be giving you automatically, it's very, very tiring. Another thing we may see is poor speech articulation because, again, those receptors in the mouth may not be giving them back that sense of, my tongue is behind my teeth, so they may not be getting those kinds of cues. And poor fine motor skills and poor play skills, which we already mentioned. If you were doing an assessment and you were using the HELP or the ELAP, these children might score very low in the area of fine motor development and self-help. Okay, so what kinds of things could we do for a child that had a problem with tactile discrimination? The main thing that we want to do with these children is increase the properties of the tactile sensory system. So you'll see on this slide we've got a child playing with Play-Doh, and there's looks like buttons in there, and she's got a rolling pin, but it's not like the slick rolling pin. It's a bumpy, knobby rolling pin. So again, lots and lots of different sensory input going into her hands. You see the balls with all the little nubs on them, or an infant quilt that has different textures. The foods that we give our children have different textures. So finger paint, pudding, shaving cream, toys with different textures. These children, you just want to give them a lot of opportunity to get extra feedback from the toys and things that they're playing with. So that's discriminative touch. Now we're going to go back and we're going to look at, went too fast, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the second area. Remember I said we divide touch into two areas. One was discriminative touch. Now we're going to talk about protective touch, because protection is the main thing that our touch system does for us, and that is to keep us from harm. And it helps us to know when something's hot or cold or something's going to hurt us. But some children over-respond to tactile input. So they respond to things that most of us would not think were painful, but they respond as if it was painful to them. As an example of this, I think about, when I have felt a little bit defensive myself. And so let's pretend that we're early interventionists and we're heading out in the afternoon to do a home visit, and we have to go to a neighborhood that maybe we don't feel particularly safe in. So we get out of the car, and we're just a little bit more on guard against the world. You know, our senses are working for us. We're watching where we're going. We're making sure that we are safe. And so we're walking down the road, and we're getting ready to go to this house, and this leaf falls from the tree and hits us on the shoulder. And we jump and run and scramble back to get to our cars. And we sit there, and our heart's pounding, and we're going, oh, my gosh, it was just a leaf. At that particular time, we were feeling tactily defensive. And I give you that example because I think that's how these children feel. They feel that anxiety all day long. And so it's not just when something touches them or when something, it's the anticipation that something might touch them. Typically, children that are defensive to touch may also be defensive to smell and taste and sound. So all of their sensory systems are defensive. And they have that anxiety with them all day long. And so, you know, the least little thing can kind of set them off. So that's protective touch. And that's one that I think you probably identify pretty easily. But take a minute and go back to your public chat and write down again. You're sitting in that home and you're observing this child. What is it that I might see? Okay, this is the one I thought you guys would do really well on because this is one I think we tend to see quite a bit. And you've mentioned a couple of things. Somebody says gagging. Yes, if your mouth is sensitive to touch and you put something into your mouth, then you may get a gagging response. Mary Ellen mentioned, I'm trying to find that because it was really good. It was, she's gone up. I can't see where it was, but a couple of things like moving from activity to activity. I think that was Mary Ellen. And this is a great sign of tactile defensiveness because this person is on guard. They can't settle in and focus on anything, so they're kind of like going from thing to thing to thing and always watching their environment and making sure nothing's going to bother them. We have from Harrisonburg, Rockingham, pulling away from their caregivers. And that's the example we talked about with that infant, you know, that you go to feed the baby, and instead of the baby kind of snuggling up and flexing and turning their head towards you, the baby's arching their back and turning their head away from you and seems to be in pain. Difficulty with getting dressed. So any kinds of hygiene and grooming activities, cutting nails, cutting hair, brushing teeth can be very, very difficult for these children. Crawling with fisted hands. The child doesn't want to have their palms on the floor, or walking with curled toes. And again, there's lots of reasons children will walk with curled toes. It doesn't always mean that there's a sensory issue, but it is one of the signs that we look at. In general, these children that are overly sensitive to touch tend to be kind of irritable, fussy, whiny, miserable babies because they're just uncomfortable in their own skin. If you're doing an assessment with an ELAP or a HELP, then you may find that these children's score score very low in areas of social emotional competence. So what about embedded intervention for protective touch? The main thing that we have to concentrate on with these children that you would need to look at is to first understand that what they're feeling is real. And so even though I know that it doesn't hurt me when I cut my fingernails, if I have a child who's screaming out of control when you go to cut their fingernails, that child is interpreting it as painful, therefore it is painful to that child. So we want to avoid unexpected kinds of touch. These children need a little bit of warm-up time. You know, if I want to hug a child because they've done a great job, and these children do like hugs, they like a firm hug more than a light pat on the back or a light touch hug. And I'd want to be in front of them, and I'd want to ask their permission. Maybe just put my arms out and let them initiate it. You'll find that children that are sensitive to touch, if they initiate the activity, therefore they have some control over it, they will usually do a little bit better. A really important thing we need to do for children and families with this is to really kind of reframe this picture for families and help families to understand that what the child is perceiving is real. We need to help families set up routines that are really predictable because these children really don't like unpredictability. And we need to help families set up areas in their house that give this child like some calm space. So like I call it womb space, you know, a place where a child knows they can go. It could be their bedroom, it could be a little tent, it could be a beanbag chair, but it's a place that they can kind of go and be enveloped. Nothing can get behind them, nothing's going to bother them, and they know they can just kind of relax and chill out a minute. Using natural lighting can be very helpful for if a child is also visually defensive. And I guess the most important thing is that we don't want to impose touch on these children. I've gone into some classrooms where it was interpreted that if the child didn't like to get his hands messy, like with finger paint or a Play-Doh or whatever, that we should just force them to do it, and then they would get used to it. And when we force them to do it, all we do is raise the anxiety level, and it makes it worse. So we never want to impose protective touch. We never want to impose touch on these children. Okay, so that was the tactile system. So let's move on to the vestibular system. Now, the vestibular system is our sense of movement. The receptors for the vestibular system are located in our inner ear, our semicircular canal, the stachel, and the utricle. And the way I think about it is it's like aquarium tubing that's kind of rolled up, and there's little hair cells on the inside of the tubing, and there's fluid. And so every time the fluid moves, those hair cells move, and that's what sends input up to my brain. So every time I move my head, I'm going to experience my vestibular system. The vestibular system is very important because it tells us if we are right side up or upside down. It tells us if we are moving forward or moving backwards. It's really important in that it contributes to our balance and our muscle tone, and has a lot to do with our ability to perform activities that require bilateral skills, where we do one thing with one side of our body and one thing with another side of our body. Such as like with a baby, I think of a hold and do activity, where maybe they pick up that little play radio with one hand, and they use their other hand to manipulate the dial. The vestibular system is mature in the full-term baby, and prior to being born, that vestibular system is stimulated by the mother's movement when she's moving and by the baby's movement. So when we have a preterm baby, that baby is going to experience much less vestibular input because they're not in the uterus as long. And then once they're born, that that ever how many weeks that they would have been in the womb, now they're laying in this crib and they're not experiencing vestibular input then. So their whole system is not getting the normal experience that a full-term baby would have. Just like our tactile system, you can be hyposensitive or hypersensitive to vestibular stimulation. So let's start with a child that is hyposensitive. Again, this is a child that under-responds. So this child is going to need a lot more input for his vestibular system to register. Take a minute, again, go back to your public chat and tell us what you might see in this child that's not getting enough information from his system. Okay, some great answers. We have a group of things where you mentioned spinning and rocking and running around, and we call these children sensory seekers because they're seeking out that information that their body's not giving them. I think, well, Evel Knievel would probably have a hyposensitive vestibular system. Otherwise, how would you have enough nerve to do some of the things that he did? These children often have poor safety awareness. So, they may be climbing and swinging and just going all out, but not really aware. Their system's not telling them, you are really, really high up. You might be in a little bit of danger. These children tend to lack fear, so the parents will say they're fearless. You may see poor muscle tone and poor joint stability, difficulty with balance. You might see falling a lot. And again, difficulties that require bilateral motor coordination. So if you were doing the HELP or the ELAP on this child, you might see low scores in gross motor and fine motor, and you might see really high activity levels. Now, sometimes with these children, their parents will say, oh, no, don't have any concern about their gross motor skills because they're like, they can climb on anything, they're all over the place, they have great gross motor skills. But typically, if we take a minute to slow the child down and we really look at the quality of the motor response, the quality of the running, the quality of how the child's moving from one thing to another, we'll often find that it really is compromised a little bit and that the child's using speed to kind of move through space. So we do want to look at that a little bit more carefully. Okay. Now we said that these children were hyposensitive to vestibular. So what are some things that we might want to do in terms of treatment? Again, we want to provide them with appropriate opportunities to move. So the neighborhood playground is great. Dads are usually pretty good at this. They like, holding the children up and tossing them in the air a little bit. We don't want to go too high with that, but we want to give them lots of movement opportunities. A little mini tramp, playground equipment, movement games. There's kind of a new thing going on. I guess it's not really new, but I'm just seeing more of it where there's using yoga for children, and even just certain yoga moves throughout the day can be very helpful for these children. So again, we want to give them lots and lots of opportunities. We want to help parents find ways hypersensitive vestibular system. And even though I can go to Busch Gardens and I can see 5-year-old children riding some of these rides, and I know that they get on and they get off, and that they're fine, and it's just a ride, and it's not going to hurt me, it is so scary for me because I interpret the speed and the height completely differently than everybody else in my family. So think about, if you're in the home doing a child, go back to your public chat and tell me what you might see in a child that was hypersensitive to vestibular input. Okay, great. You've hit on a lot of these. Crying when being laid down for a diaper change. This is a big one. You know, it's really scary. If you have a vestibular system, you go backwards in space, that's really scary because you can't see where you're going. Not liking playground equipment. Difficulty being passed from person to person to person. These babies don't like to be passed around. Car sickness, vomiting. These children very, very sensitive to car rides or stroller rides or anything like that. Swings make them very upset and may actually cause them to vomit. Don't like playgrounds, aren't climbers. Again, these children are very passive, clingy children. They don't like open stairs. They don't like escalators. Lots of frequent meltdowns. So, you know, these are just not your go-with-the-flow kinds of children. You have to go slow with them. So what are the things that we would want to do? And as I mentioned, you go slow. Know that linear movement is more tolerable than movement that's in an arc. So you see this baby's on the little mini tramp, and this baby has full control of how much they want to move, how little or how much, got something to hold on to, and it's going up and down. And again, we don't want to impose. We want to encourage, and we want to encourage at an area that a child can be successful. So maybe they just sit in the swing in your lap initially, but they don't really move. They move just a little bit, but again, let them have some control. The last sensory system we're going to talk about is our sense of proprioception. And those receptors are located in our tendons and our joints, our muscles. They tell us where our body parts are and what they are doing. So my proprioceptors allow me to tell you what position my feet are in, again, without looking at my feet. It's just how I know where my body is in space. And it provides us the feedback we need to be able to modulate our force. So it tells me that when I'm riding my bicycle, I can pedal with my feet, I can hold on with my hands, and I can look ahead. Proprioception is something that we are not usually aversive to. I personally have never worked with a child that was hypersensitive or over-responsive to proprioception, but we do tend to see some children that are under-responsive to proprioceptive input. So take a minute, and I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to tell me on your public chat, if you're in the home, what might you see if a child is under-responsive to proprioceptive input? Okay, great. Again, you have some really great answers on this. One of the things I see in a couple of your responses are things like breaking things. You know, because our proprioceptors tell us how to modulate our force, if we're not getting that feedback, then we're going to break our crayons, we're going to break our toys, we're going to break the glue stick, we're going to break our Oreo cookie, and then we're going to have a major meltdown. I see things, poor motor coordination, bumping into things. This is very true. These children, they're like puppy dogs, you know, that don't know where their body is in space. So they're kind of clumsy. They might really seek out a lot of that jumping and crashing because that's what it takes to give their muscles and joints the input that they need. And they have difficulties looking at doing things without looking at them. So those are our three systems. And again, in order to, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Let's go to embedded intervention. What do we do for children that are under-responsive to proprioceptive input? You will hear OTs are always talking about heavy work activities, heavy work activities. Heavy work activities are anything that works your muscles and your joints. So pushing and pulling with weight are things that tell you where your body is in space. When I leave the house in the morning with my pocketbook on my shoulder, I'm really not aware of my shoulder. But by the afternoon, if I have continued to carry that pocketbook, all of a sudden I know exactly where my shoulder is because it's gotten that feedback over and over and over. So on your slides, you can see we've got a little boy pulling a wagon, and it's been loaded down with some toys. We've got a child carrying books. We've got backpacks. You can put some things in the backpack to give it a little weight. I find that children that are in need of additional proprioceptive input, they're the ones that don't want to take their backpacks off, and you'll see them eating breakfast with their backpack on. They get it on before they get ready to go to school. And some other things that will give you that heavy work are even things that you eat. So chewy kinds of things give you heavy work to the mouth. Anything that works those muscles and joints is going to give you additional proprioceptive input. So we've given you some ideas of things that you can do with the children that you're working with. And I'd like to spend just a couple minutes to talk about going into classroom situations if you're seeing a child in daycare or at a child care provider, and helping teachers and daycare providers understand that the things that we're suggesting are great for children who have sensory processing disorders, but they're also really, really great for all children. So these are just some things that can be done in every classroom, in every home to help all children. And that, if you use these techniques, you're going to find that transitions will go more easily. Children seem to have more fun. There's less fear. They're more independent with the activities that they're doing, and they will have better social interaction. So in general, activities that will increase alertness with children, when you go to work with a child, the first thing I do is try to figure out, where are they? Are they at a really good level of focus and attention so they can work with me, or do I need to kind of lift them up a little bit, or do I need to calm them down? So if I want to increase their alertness, I'm going to use movement. I'm going to use playground activities, sit and spin, animal walks, and yoga stretches. I might use some tactile kinds of things. So light touch and finger paint will increase a child's alertness level. I'm going to use crunchy foods, or drinking through a straw, or a cold drink, or a cold washcloth on the face is going to increase the alertness level. If I need to calm children down, I'm going to use movement again, but I'm going to use slow kinds of movement. I may go to natural lighting or give children fidget toys to hold. I'm going to make sure there's a womb space in my home or my classroom that a child knows they can just go and be protected from the world. Sucking is going to be something that, we know babies that need extra non-nutritive sucking will suck that pacifier because it's very calming. So like slurping on a Slurpee or a thick milkshake, that can also be calming. Back rubs or infant massage. And again, experiment with soft music in classrooms or homes. That can have a really nice calming effect on children. Activities that help us to organize are chewy kinds of foods like granola bars and licorice and cheese and dried fruit, or things that give us a deep stretch to our bodies like hanging for a while on monkey bars. For an infant to flex and swaddle, one of the greatest things you can know how to do is to really do a good swaddle wrap for a baby and to help families understand how to use that. And again, doing heavy work. Strategies that work, we've mentioned a lot of these, are keeping things organized and clutter-free, especially avoiding some of the visual clutter. Think about, how much is going on in the environment if you have a child that's a little defensive. I think most of these we've already covered. Again, routine and predictability is so important for all children, not just children with sensory processing problems. And last, I'd just like to mention, when do you call in the expertise of an occupational therapist? The strategies that I've given you are safe things that you can try with children that you think may have a problem with a sensory processing disorder. If the child has a little problem with this and you try these strategies and you help reframe that behavior for the family or the caregivers in that child's life and that child's able to function, that's great. You've done well. If, however, these strategies are not making a difference, then you really need to have an occupational therapist that has some expertise in sensory processing come in and help consult with you. When we work with children as OTs, we're doing very specific experiences for these children to help that plasticity piece of their brain improve the way they process sensory input. And it's very important that these children get seen by somebody that can work out, we call it a sensory diet, and some treatment types of things for this child and their family. All OTs are familiar with sensory processing disorders. Are all exposed to it in their graduate degrees, but I think it really is a very complex topic, and so if you can find somebody that's done a little bit of work outside of their graduate program, then that would probably be a person that would just have a little bit more ability to help you. In closing, I would just like to say that sensory processing is very complex, and I've really given you just a very simple way of looking at it. I hope it will help you when you look at children to better define the issues that they're having and that you'll be able to use some of these strategies. But I encourage you to take the opportunity to maybe go to a course that would give you a full day or a couple of days because, again, it's just a very, very complex topic. Dana?
Okay, great. Thank you, Tracy. I think this was wonderful. I was thinking about what you said about it being complex. I always had a hard time when I was treating kids wrapping my brain around proprioception, but I think you did a beautiful job to make it straightforward. We are at the conclusion of our content now, so I want to invite you guys to type in any questions you have in the public chat. I'm going to just pause for a minute and give you an opportunity to do that. I don't think we had any questions that weren't answered as we went along. So if you have questions, now's your opportunity to ask Tracy. Okay, well, it looks like we have a question from Fairfax Falls Church. Can you offer strategies for children who dislike hair washing?
And that is all. We know a lot of children that don't have sensory processing disorders that don't like hair washing. One of the things that I find that they really don't like is that they don't want the water in their eyes. So giving them like a washcloth to put over their eyes, but also letting them, again, go back to giving them some control. So letting them be the ones that will put the water on their head, do a lot of play. I have them wash their baby doll. We use some cognitive strategies so that, you want to try to get the the soap, it's usually getting the soap out of their hair that's the problem. And so we might use some cognitive strategies like we're going to say the ABCs, we're going to count to 10, and once we've counted to 10, it's all over. So just think of cognitive strategies, playing with their dolls, having them do it, and then giving them some control so that they can do the water themselves.
Okay, it looks like we have another question, Tracy. If you have any ideas for resources where people can learn more about this topic. I don't know if there's a website that you particularly like or a book that you can refer people to.
Well, there's several, but there's a website, I think it's sinetwork.org, but if you Google sensory processing disorder, the STAR program, or Lucy Jane Miller, you'll get websites to where, that will take you to some good information on sensory processing disorders. I think that both early interventionists and families seem to really like the books by Carol Kranowitz, The Out of Sync Child. I think that just puts things in a pretty nice perspective. It makes it easy to understand. So those would be two good resources.
Okay, another book I don't know if you recommend is Tracy, Raising a Sensory Smart Child.
That's a great book, Dana.
Yeah, that's another one that we used to find useful. Families found it real easy to read. I guess another question has popped up. Maybe if you have a strategy for attention for a child to help a child be able to sit and look at a book with fun.
I tell you what's been working for me lately is having a little book on, I have a little books on my iPad that they're just visually, a little bit more stimulating, and the child can touch them, and the characters will come alive, and Sandra Boynton has several. They're like $1.99, $2, and a lot of families have smartphones and are starting to use some of the iPads or the Samsungs. So, that is one strategy. The other thing I think is to keep the books really, really simple, and don't insist, if a child's really sensitive to touch, they may not want to sit in your lap to do the reading. So, again, just giving them some control.
Okay, great. I see Chelsea has posted another website, sensoryprocessingdisorders.com is also a helpful resource.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea.
I know hard to think off the top of my head.
Nothing like being put on the spot, is it? Well, I think we're going to wrap up for the day. It's about 1 o'clock, so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I want to invite you to save the date for next month.